Hello and welcome to another episode of Mel Underground. I'm Mel and today we are overground. We're looking at this, which is a hole made from removing the lead pipe and the fitting that was on here. This needs patching and it's a little bit uneven, so we're going to do a little bit of remedial work on that. And we're also going to start patching some of these holes we made from the plaster repair. So let's bring you in and get started. Okay, so you may remember we've had this hole here which used to have a gas fitting in it that was papered over, well, plastered over. We've taken that out and we're left with this big gaping hole. We also have the slight issue with the fact that this is quite raised up over the plaster around it. And I think they've just built this level of cement up to hide the fitting that was buried in here and to hide these two screws as well. So I think what we'll have to do is start chipping away at some of this and get it a bit more level. First time plastering in a while. This is probably really embarrassing. So I've used finishing plaster on this, which is only really good for like 2mm coats, and I've done about, in places, like 15 to 20mm. So basically it's dried out too quickly. It's all cracked. And it's not like it's just a visual thing. A lot of these are rising up above the surface, so it's not like I can just fill in the cracks and paper over it and it's fine. So I think I'm gonna have to rip it all out and start again. Okay, so this has obviously been a failure, but as part of DIY, it's kind of learning as you go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start ripping all this out. After I've peeled it all off, I'm going to go and buy some undercoat plaster, which is good for about 10mm, and I'm going to build it up over a couple of layers to make sure we don't get this kind of issue again. And I'll possibly do a very thin finishing coat just to finish everything off. So this has been a learning experience for me. Hopefully it'll teach you things not to do when you're doing plastering. Okay, so on to the actual plastering. I've got an undercoat plaster here mixed up. I've made it fairly thick, just to help it push through the laths and form a really nice key on the other side. So what I'm doing here is just putting the plaster on the wall and applying a fairly reasonable amount of force just to force that plaster through the laths. Once we've got a reasonable coat built up, I'm just going to pull the plaster from side to side in this crack just to make sure that the finished layer is actually sub-flush to the surface, and that'll mean we've got room for a second coat to go on top of this. So all I've done here is waited for it to dry for about 20 minutes, half an hour. I've then come back just with the edge of the trowel and I've just scored this crisscross into the surface, and that then means when we put our second coat on, it's still got this mechanical key to help hold the plaster to the layer underneath it. Okay, so I've done 2 coats of the undercoat plaster. And as you can see, we've got no cracks or any kind of real issues at the moment. This has been drying now for about 6 hours, so it's pretty much there. So I think we're going to get away with no cracks. So it's just a lesson to make sure that you use the right plaster for the job. One thing I would say about this undercoat stuff is that it's got some really coarse sand in it. So it's not that great for doing thin sections because you tend to get the sand showing through. So I think it's not produced a brilliant surface. Part of that is my plastering. Part of it is the plaster itself is not a finishing plaster. So if we were just looking to patch something and then paint over it, I would have finished it with a multi-finish plaster or something similar. As it is, because we're going to lining paper over this whole thing, I'm not too fussed about the finish. So I'm quite happy just to get it roughly smooth and leave it as that. But it's definitely not a surface I want to paint, because it would look terrible. Okay, so hopefully this has been a lesson in how not to plaster, and then how to fix your mistakes if you do it the wrong way. I think the key point here is to use the right plaster for the right job, and to always read the instructions. As always, thanks for tuning in. I'm Mel, and this has been Mel Underground. Overground.